Anima-saurus world, and thank you for joining me for another Interviewasaurus. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined in still our virtual studios. I'm lucky to have VFX soup, Rangi Sutton. Thanks for joining me, Rangi.
Hey Kim, thank you. Appreciate the chance to get a go on your show. Uh, Hopefully, I can provide something of interest.
I'm sure there's going to be heaps of interesting things which we're going to come across anyway. For people who don't know you, do you just want to give everyone a quick background of where you come from and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm a visual effects supervisor primarily. Though that's a role that's I'm working to reconfigure a bit more towards the virtual production side of things, but very much a history in visual effects and animation. I'm Brisbane based, same as yourself, and that's these days. I originally come out from the Blue Mountains, so New South Welsh boy, and studied out at UTS, and that was sort of in the old days where you didn't really have animation courses and those sorts of things. So I studied computer science, and yeah, it was pretty good. But it was a little bit dry though. I found that what the sort of jobs they were sort of pitching you'd get into when you finished computer science would be programming at financial institutions and those sorts of things. And like that sort of passion for computers that I had was sort of about to wilt, I think. It's sort of like I looked down the barrel of a life of wearing ties and
Spreadsheets.
coding. Yeah, well, oddly enough, spreadsheets is a lot of what I do these days. But it was I don't know, like just financials. I guess was a lot of what the programming jobs are going to be. So just at that sort of point where like university was come to a close, it really occurred to me that the only thing I was really finding interesting in the course was all the computer graphics subjects, and so that's what I wanted to do was computer graphics.
Yep.
But I guess in those days we were just sort of starting to get hyped on virtual reality. This is the late 90s.
Yep.
And so I'm like, that's what I want to do. I'm going to get into VR and do all sorts of like really crazy things like Lawnmower Man and
good old Lawnmower Man. Man, that was such a classic. That was.
Yeah. And of course, you sort of start looking into it, and the technology at the time was just really, really not there yet. And so the way that you could sort of progress in that field was obviously doing film and television kind of stuff. So that's what I've progressed into.
Yeah.
And and I mean, just jumping forward, it's only now that we're going, oh shit, we can go back to that dream we had 20 years ago, and find that the tech is starting to enable it.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost $40,000 for a crap head mount display anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So dreams and ambitions of virtual reality and all those sorts of things took me into making commercials and films and working in that what I now call traditional visual effects. It wasn't. It was all pretty new and developmental at the time, late 90s. But yeah, I managed to get my first job doing a technical support role for the company that now makes Houdini, basically. Oh. So the old for Side Effects' previous program, which is called Prisms. Oh. So that's sort of how I cut my teeth. Yep. I was trying to apply those sort of programmer skills I had to the world of visual effects and animation.
Yeah, I was going to ask, the computer science background, the programming background, I'm guessing that would have served you well as you got into visual effects, being able to actually understand and direct the way that you saw visual effects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what it did was gave me opportunity because obviously there's real technical components to doing animation and visual effects as well as that creative side. Yep. And I guess late 90s, it was almost more about the technology than anything else because the tools just were not user friendly in the least. You needed to be. Most people either had a computer science background or an architectural background. They'd be doing draft work and then they'd get into AutoCAD and then they'd go, oh, it's super exciting over here in animation. So that's sort of like what most of us were in that period, as either programmers or architects. And
Yeah.
that's going, oh, how do we do this? But yes, it sort of served me fairly well. But obviously, I've got much rustier. The programming I was doing at
Yep.
university was much deeper than anything that I've done subsequently.
Yep.
These days it's mostly Python and really accessible languages like that.
Yeah.
Or if it's C++, it'd be inside of Unreal Engine, and there's heaps of tutes and there's blueprints to get you in the slow way.
Yep.
So I think that these days that technology background doesn't give you quite the advantage it gave you in the 90s.
Yep.
But it's certainly, there are certainly roles where if you come in saying, I'm a strong programmer and I understand what you're trying to do, then you can be very useful in a studio.
Yep.
But certainly that was the way in back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Was for me.
Like you just said, broader picture within studios, there's a lot more roles which people can kind of get into, like pipeline support and tech support within some of the biggest studios is a whole department in itself. It's not just one person sitting there going, oh, we've got the pipeline to working. You've got 5 or 6 people actually there nutting out tools and tech to try and handle some big special effects shots. There's a lot which goes into that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's probably what I still really love about the industry is that spectrum of what your crew looks like. You've got people who, they can't pick up a pencil, but they can code and imagine amazing interfaces and things, through to people who, have difficulty finding the on switch, but they can just paint and do amazing things. And that whole spectrum in between is what makes up your crew.
Yep.
And I just don't know anything else where everyone is so together in that. Like there may be other places where you've got programmers and creatives and things, but they're worlds apart. Whereas I find with visual effects in particular, you need all those people in one room talking to each other, and that's what's so amazing about it. There's no dismissal of they don't know computers. So it's like, well, they're fantastically creative. We need them, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think that's always been a draw for me, because that's me. I love sitting on that boundary between the tech and the creative.
Yep.
And that's what we get here.
Yeah, like with being a VFX soup, I mean, the big thing which you really do have to do is be able to work with people and be able to communicate your ideas. So that broad spectrum must be a very handy skill set when you're trying to communicate between the different streams of people you're trying to discuss with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, visual effects soup is a pretty broadly defined role. Like there's different types of VFX soups, and we all do our thing our own way. And I've noticed some are really quite hands-on. They're jumping in and on the tools. Others will be a lot more like, I'm dealing with the client and I'm just focusing on the creative, and can I have a good comp soup and a good CG soup to worry about that tech detail for me, and everything in between. And I'm more towards the hands-on, because otherwise I'll get a little bit bored if I don't actually get to hit the tools at some point. But I find you're right. There's having technology skills as a VFX soup's important, creative skills, people skills, and project management skills. And so you sort of need at least sort of 3 of the 4, I think, to be a VFX soup in this day and age.
Yep.
And an interest in whatever you're not good at out of those 4, because that's what your day holds, is dealing with people, the project management, and the technology, because that they all work to make the show fit together. And and that's why I really like that job. I mean, how many jobs do you get to cover all those sorts of things in one day?
Yeah, it is. It's a very unique field in itself to actually get into. But I mean, that was the way you got into being a VFX soup now. But what do you think's going to happen for people who are only just starting out now? What sort of a pathway that you see is a good way? Because there's not just one way to get into VFX anymore. There is such a spectrum of tools and avenues and pathways to get into it. But what do you see when you get people coming to you, or you look at demo reels, or you look at resumes or CVs? What sort of things do you think are a great pathway to get into VFX now?
Entering the industry, there is still, I think, something that is the same in 2020 as there was in 97, which is be useful. Yeah, so that's
Right.
the first and foremost thing is go. It's not just like, look how talented I am. It's also, I can solve your problems. And so that's still fundamentally the same thing if you make it as simple as that. But what does that mean? Like, I can solve your problems, and it's I can get in there and I can track your cameras and I can rotoscope and I can model or do layouts super fast. Like I can bring some of the labor, the skilled labor that the junior roles hold. I can come in and I can sort some of those, or I could come in and your scripts aren't quite working right. That's all a bit manual. I can go and tweak your scripts, or I can help set up that server that you need as you're upgrading, or the license management, or there's an awful lot of things like that I think you need to sort of prove that from day one you'd be able to be contributing on. But I'm also, if it's me reading the CV, I'm also looking at where is it going to be in a few years from now, because that's why you hire in the people in the junior roles, is ideally so that you can help foster them through those first few years into something that's really useful to you, because you get a strong junior, they're worth gold.
Yep.
And so we're looking at like day one usefulness, year 3 usefulness, and then we're also looking to see like a passion for where they want to be, far in the future, because that means that they're going to have that drive to get through those early years, because it's tough.
Yeah.
It's a lot of hard work. So if people aren't going like, and this is where I want to be, like here's my future goal, then you're just going to think they're going to give up because it's so hard.
Yeah.
Because it frankly is really hard. So I think you could go in saying I can script. Is one really useful thing that people want to hear. Like I've got Python, or you go in saying I can rig. It's so hard to find a really good rigger these days. And then of the other sort of tasks, it's like I'm good and I'm fast.
Yep.
So I can texture or shade fast, really good.
Yeah.
Not just I'm good, I can do it really quick.
Yeah.
So it's being able to pitch yourself like that, so that you can just see, the soup's eyes open up and the coordinator's eyes open up to go, oh yeah, that we need them now.
You've picked up a really good point that not a lot of people who go through an education system as such pick up to know that they're actually in-demand roles, and that's rigging and scripting. Like scripting, like you said, there's so much you can apply a scripting to make things faster, or repetitive tasks just happen in a script rather than having to manually do it step over and over again. And rigging's the other thing, where even though you think it's a simple thing like, oh yeah, the rig's done and I'll just animate now, there's always the parts of going, well, rigging in itself just drives everything from an animator to be able to do. So a rigging support team is also incredibly important, but it's also very hard to do because it's fairly technical.
Absolutely. And with the scripting, I guess the different studio sizes are going to be differently interested in how much you can script. If it's a medium size or a small studio, then the more people who can script, the more little scripts get written every day. Yeah. So in between, you might have something on the render farm and you might be working on your script.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of that sort of sharing roles, and that makes you super useful. Like when it comes time to scale down, which is always time to scale down in studios, the person who's just been continually contributing to making the whole team more efficient by writing those scripts is going to be held onto.
Yeah.
And then rigging is the other sort of kind of parallel example of that, where the rigger is such a useful person and they're so hard to find that you're going to make yourself in that Keepe group as we shrink down. That said, becoming a really strong keyframe animator is at the moment increasingly in demand, and maybe that's what you want to do. Like you just want to be an animator, in which case be a really good one. That's and there's a lot more of those jobs, right? So you might have 30 animators and 3 riggers. So the numbers work out for the animators, except you're going to be much more part of that fluctuation of we need lots of animators. Now we don't. Now we need lots of animators. Now we don't. And maybe that's a lifestyle that you enjoy, is just that short contracts, new crew, new people, move on. In which case, that some of those roles and specializing and just becoming really great at what you do. Because scripting's not for everyone, rigging's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it's part of the industry. Like from my perspective, coming back as an animator, that was one thing I didn't know actually happened, was the rolling ebb and flow of projects. Once you actually get into it and you can follow your crew, you got to have your ear to the ground to know where the next project is at the end of the first one. Otherwise, you're going to be left without a job and going, oh, I got to do something. It's hard,
yes.
especially here in if you're not used to it, if you're not used to the industry, you think Brisbane's a big town, we've got a couple of studios here, there's always going to be animating work, when in fact there's not always. Sometimes there'll be a burst and everyone's actually needed, and then sometimes there'll be bust times when you might be lucky and you have to be going for freelance work or trying to find online work as any way you can get it.
Yeah, and that boom and bust is something that has has in some ways plagued the industry, I guess, at least in my experience. Uh, it only takes one studio to ramp up for it to become the employees market.
Yeah.
Where you can start saying, oh, well, I want these conditions and I want to be paid this. And then it only takes one studio to be really shutting down, or, ramping down or something, for that just to completely turn on its head, and
Yeah.
it become an employees market. So it's pretty volatile like that. And I think you're just keeping an eye on and watching the industry news, and making sure you've got friends about who
Yeah.
might be in these studios that you keep contact with, just to know which way the wind's blowing at any given time.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, you have to be accepting that that's this industry. It's not the industry for necessarily stable, guaranteed work. It's a bit more for people who would like to be able to move around as well. I mean, it's not necessarily a negative thing that you work at this company for a few months and then that company. That can be a fantastic experience.
Yeah,
So
it's a lifestyle choice which you can choose, and it's one of those industries which can get you to travel around the world to different countries, and you can kind of almost be welcomed with open arms, going, well, you've got a skill set which we need. So
yes, yeah,
yeah,
and I've had the fortune to work in London and Ireland and America, and that's been brilliant for me because I love traveling, and traveling where you actually just settle down and park and work and get to know a crew is probably the most pleasurable for me, because you get a more profound sense of a place
yeah,
by living there and being there. And if you can get to London, if speaking as Australians, you get to London, you're so close to everything else.
yeah,
I mean, it's not that this year,
yeah,
obviously, but things will return,
yeah,
and it's a fantastic sort of place to park, and it's a great industry to accommodate that.
yeah.
But it's not the industry for, I just want to work 40 hours a week and be guaranteed I'm going to see my long service leave and this and this and this. It's not
Yeah.
how it works at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's roles within the industry that do act like that, like you were saying, with like tech support or computer support or hardware support. Those sort of roles do exist where you can find a company that is long term. Because I know there's a few of them in Australia here. You look at Animal Logic; it's been around as long as I've been around, and they've always needed people to upkeep their computer systems. So that those sort of roles are available, but they're just rare as hen's teeth, and they've usually got someone who's already been in there and knows what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Strangely enough, I went to university with Justin Marshall, who um, he started work at Anima Logic as we graduated, or before we graduated, even in the sandwich year that UTS was doing at the time. And he's there now. So he's sort of like the converse to my career trajectory, where I've lost count of how many studios I've worked at. I've run my own studio, done just everything for a while, just long enough to get my bit out of it, and then I move on. And that's my personality, and I think that's how I like it. But you're right. There are you can make yourself useful, be there at the right time, the right place, and be with the company as it grows and stay with it.
Yeah.
And Animal's a fantastic example of an Australian success story, really.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two of them, and the other, I guess, the last thing which I kind of wanted to get your perspective of, because you have seen so much around the world and touched on quite a few different places, is this moment in time we're in at the moment. You know, Australia's in quite an interesting sort of spot in that we've been able to attract and keep our industry going here. Do you think that there's now going to be a new renaissance period within Australian animation that's attracted people, and people are going to want to come here and stay here to animate?
Possibly. I mean, I think that what's happened in the last year has shown that we don't all need to be sitting in the same studio in the same place. I think that it's something which I've always tried to promote, is working with people geographically dispersed, because we can, and because my mates are over there or over here, and I want to work with them. And I think that that's been quite a big takeaway from the COVID is just how possible that is. When I was running my little studio, I had the most senior guy was in New Caledonia running off a laptop, and he just loved the lifestyle there and loves the place, and he could just do it. And we were very well, we just sat on Skype the whole time. We just continually talked. But I've noticed that I've always had to push hard to make that happen inside of other studios, like that we want people to dial in and connect in and work with us. And particularly with things like the Trusted Partner Network and things where the studios they're very protective of their IP. And so the rules are that everyone has to be in the studio, and that's where we started the year. That's what the rules were. If you're working on a Warner Brothers show, or or some something that they really can't see it leaking on the internet, like this, we cannot have this get out. Then the approach was, what one part of that is everyone has to show up to work inside this locked up studio, and there's all sorts of rules about cameras and things. And by necessity this year, we've seen a lot of the service studios say, well, we can't make you film if everyone has to come in. And so they've okayed people working from home using Teradici and that sort of technology just to dial into the studios. And it's worked. Yeah. So I guess what we might find is, moving forward, that yes, there might be some sort of renaissance in animation here in Australia, and I really hope there is. But that's in some way going to be enabled by the fact that we can burst up, we can get bigger by bringing people in from other countries virtually.
Yep.
And because I think Australia does have an issue with that whole flip-flop of, is there enough work for our animators? Or is there enough animators for all the work we've got? It's always like the pendulum's always swung one way or the other, making it difficult for everyone. And I think just being able to take in from a broader community is going to be great. And also just people inside of Australia. I mean, people want to live in Brisbane and work with Melbourne people, or maybe head up to the top end or something, and just get really far out of it and still be part of something, an exciting animation project. Yeah. So I think that's definitely going to be one of the takeaways from this year is more of that.
Yep.
And maybe that also means a boost in the industry.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there, Rangi. Thank you so much for actually sharing your wisdom with all of the community with us. I hope everybody who's listens gets a kick out of this. Make sure you subscribe, check Rangi out on any of his social media pages. I'll leave links down in the comments. And until the next time, we'll all say bye-bye.
Thank you, Kim.